Long before the world knew his name, in a quiet corner of Italy, a small and fragile boy was growing up. His heart burned with an extraordinary love for God. His life would be brief, only 14 years, but the light he left behind would shine across centuries. This was the story of Dominic Savio, a boy who proved that holiness is not reserved for the old, the powerful, or the famous. Even a child with a pure heart and deep faith can become a saint. Dominic was born on April 2nd, 1842, in a humble family in Italy. His parents were poor, but rich in faith. They raised their son to love God above all things. From a very young age, Dominic showed signs his heart was different. While other children ran about in games and mischief, Dominic often spent quiet moments in prayer. He loved the church, loved the Mass, and loved speaking about God with a seriousness that surprised adults. Those who knew him often noticed something unusual about the boy. He was cheerful, kind, and full of life. Yet there was a depth to his soul that seemed far beyond his years. Dominic made a powerful resolution: rather death than sin. These were not empty words for him, they were the compass of his young heart. At the age of 12, Dominic's life changed when he met the great priest and educator John Bosco. Don Bosco immediately recognized the extraordinary spiritual spark in the young boy. He welcomed Dominic into his school and spiritual family, where the young student began to grow rapidly in virtue. He grew in prayer and love for others. But Dominic's holiness was not the gloomy kind that keeps people at a distance. On the contrary, it was joyful. He was energetic and deeply caring toward his companions. He defended the weak, settled quarrels among students. He encouraged his friends to pray and constantly tried to lead others closer to God. Not with harsh words, but with kindness, example, and a contagious joy. Yet beneath his cheerful smile, God was preparing Dominic for a mission far greater than anyone could imagine. His life would not be long, but it would be powerful enough to remind the entire world of one simple truth: holiness is possible for everyone, even the young. This is the remarkable story of Saint Dominic Savio, the boy who chose heaven with all his heart and became one of the youngest saints the Church has ever known. On March 5th, 1950, during a special Holy Year, an extraordinary moment unfolded in St. Peter's Basilica. The immense church was overflowing with young people from nearly every corner of the world. They had gathered not to celebrate a king, a warrior, or a famous scholar, but to witness the beatification of a simple schoolboy, Dominic Savio. The atmosphere was electric with joy and reverence. Inside the basilica, about 70,000 young voices rose together in celebration as the Holy Father, Pope Pius XII, was carried solemnly into the basilica. Pope had come to venerate the sacred relic of the young confessor whose life had inspired so many. But the celebration did not stop inside the basilica. Outside, in the vast square, designed by Gian Lorenzo Ber, 20,000 more people joined in the rejoicing. Their cheers echoed through the magnificent colonnade and spilled out into the streets of Rome. The sound seemed to travel far beyond the city, across the ancient landscapes of Europe and even toward the distant lands of the Atlantic and Pacific, carried by the news of this remarkable event. The spectacle was so powerful, so filled with youthful enthusiasm and spiritual triumph, that Pope Pius XII himself was deeply moved. Overwhelmed by the sight of thousands of young people celebrating holiness, he reportedly exclaimed with amazement, "Never was such a sight seen in St. Peter's before." And truly, it was something new in the long history of the Church. The world was witnessing the recognition of a saint who had not been a priest, a missionary, or a martyr, but a schoolboy. Dominic Savio had lived the ordinary life of a student, yet he had filled that ordinary life with extraordinary virtue. For centuries, saints had often been associated with monasteries, deserts, missionary lands, or heroic martyrdoms. But Dominic Savio's story elevated something much closer to everyday life: the classroom, the playground, and the struggles of youth. Through his example, the Church showed that holiness could flourish, even in the simple routines of school life. Never before had the dignity of the life of a student been celebrated in such a profound way. By honoring Dominic Savio as a schoolboy confessor, the Church was proclaiming to the entire world that sanctity is not reserved for the elderly or the heroic few. Even the young, while studying, playing, and growing, can live lives of heroic virtue. And so, the thunderous cheers that filled St. Peter's Basilica that day were more than just a celebration. They were a powerful message to the youth of every nation. Holiness is possible for you to. At the time when Dominic Savio was growing up, the customs of the church were different from what many Catholics know today. Children were usually not permitted to receive their first Holy Communion until they were about 11 or 12 years old. The church wanted to be sure that young people truly understood the sacred mystery of the Holy Eucharist before approaching the altar. But Dominic was no ordinary child. By the time he was 7 years old, Dominic already knew his catechism by heart. He understood something deeper than simple memorization. In his young heart, he had developed a sincere and profound love for Jesus present in the Blessed Sacrament. He longed to receive Holy Communion with a devotion that surprised even the adults around him. Seeing the boy's eagerness, Dominic approached his parish priest with a desire to receive our Lord. The priest knew the child well and had observed his remarkable piety, witnessing his devotion during Mass. Yet the priest hesitated. Dominic was still so young, and church custom strongly discouraged admitting children to Holy Communion before the usual age. The responsibility weighed heavily on him. He knew that this was not a decision to take lightly. However, the more he examined Dominic's life, the more he realized that the boy possessed an unusual maturity of faith. Dominic did not simply repeat prayers, he understood them. He did not merely attend Mass, he loved it. His reverence for the Eucharist and his clear grasp of its meaning were greater than that of many older children. Still uncertain, the priest decided to consult other clergy in the surrounding area. Together, they discussed the matter carefully. After thoughtful consideration, they reached an extraordinary conclusion. Dominic Savio was spiritually prepared. Despite his young age, he would be allowed to receive his first Holy Communion. When Dominic heard the news, his heart overflowed with joy. This was the moment he would finally welcome Jesus into his heart. Immediately, he began preparing himself with great seriousness, determined to make the day as holy and meaningful as he could. The evening before his first communion, Dominic approached his mother with touching humility and sincerity, looking at her with deep affection. "Aside entry, tomorrow is my first communion day. Please forgive me for all the wrong I have done you. I promise that from now on I will behave much better. I will do better at school and be more respectful and obedient." These simple words revealed something remarkable about the young boy. Even at such a tender age, Dominic understood that receiving Jesus meant striving to become better. He knew that true love for God must be shown through humility, repentance, and the desire to grow in virtue. When the long-awaited day finally arrived, it became one of the most important moments of his life. After receiving Holy Communion, Dominic quietly took his prayer book and wrote down 4 resolutions on the flyleaf. These promises, made by a 7-year-old child, would guide the entire course of his short but holy life. His resolutions were simple, yet deeply profound. "I will go to confession often and receive Holy Communion as often as my confessor will allow me. I will keep Sundays and holy days sacred. My friends will be Jesus and Mary. Death rather than sin." These words reveal the astonishing depth of Dominic's spiritual life. They were not childish sentiments or passing emotions. They were firm commitments that shaped the way he lived each day. The final resolution, death rather than sin, in particular shows the extraordinary seriousness with which he viewed his relationship with God. Even as a small boy, Dominic understood that nothing in the world was worth losing the grace of God. What makes this moment so inspiring is how practical. Dominic did not dream of grand achievements or heroic adventures. Instead, he focused on simple but powerful goals. Frequent confession, devotion to the Eucharist, respect for holy days, friendship with Jesus and Mary, and a firm resolve to avoid sin. From that day forward, these promises became the foundation of his spiritual journey. And though he was only 7 years old, the quiet resolutions written in that small prayer book would lead him on the path to becoming one of the youngest saints ever recognized by the Church. A shining example that holiness is not reserved for adults, but is possible even in the heart of a child. As Dominic Savio grew older, the quiet holiness that had already begun to shine in his childhood continued to deepen. His love for God was not something that kept him apart from ordinary life. It guided the way he studied, walked, played, and treated others. Until the age of 10, Dominic attended the local village school near his home. There, he quickly became known as a bright and disciplined pupil. But soon it became clear that if he wished to continue his education, he would need to attend a better school located in the nearby town of Castelnuovo. For most children, this might have seemed like a small step forward. For Dominic, however, it meant a serious sacrifice. The school was nearly 8 miles away, which meant that every day he would have to walk a long distance 8 miles to school and 8 miles back home again. The road was not easy or safe. It stretched across lonely countryside, and in those days, such roads were often dangerous, sometimes haunted by wandering tramps and thieves. Many villagers were troubled when they saw the small boy making this difficult journey, day after day. In winter, he walked through rain, cold winds, and snow, and in summer, he traveled beneath the burning heat of the sun. The peasant farmers who worked nearby often shook their heads in disbelief. They wondered how Charles Savio, the village blacksmith, could allow his son to travel so far alone, just for schooling. To them, it seemed impractical, even risky. Yet Dominic never complained. One day, while the young boy was walking along the road beneath a blazing sun, a man who passed by stopped and looked at him with concern. The Travella asked, kindly, "Are you not afraid, my boy, to walk these roads alone?" Dominic answered simply, without hesitation, "I am never alone, sir. My guardian angel is always with me." The man smiled at the child's innocence but continued, "But surely this long walk must tire you, especially in such heat." Dominic's reply revealed the secret of his strength. Nothing is tiring when it is done for God, who repays so well. The sincerity of the boy's words deeply touched the man. That evening, while sitting with the villagers during their usual gathering in the large barn where they shared stories and conversation, he told them about the encounter. After recounting Dominic's words, the man concluded thoughtfully, "A boy of 10 who thinks so seriously at that age will surely be heard of again someday, whatever path he chooses." Meanwhile, Dominic's father had not made the decision lightly. Charles Savio had been reluctant at first to allow his son to travel such a great distance alone. But Dominic's eagerness to learn was so strong, and his determination so sincere, that his father finally agreed. In time, it became clear that this decision had been wise. At the new school, Dominic quickly distinguished himself. His teachers were impressed not only by his intelligence, but also by his character. One of his masters later testified that Dominic possessed a rare quality that drew people to him naturally. "There was," the teacher said, "a certain charm in his manner that won instant sympathy. Gentle in his ways and always kind. No one ever saw him out of his usual good humor." From the first day he entered the school until the day he left it, Dominic consistently ranked first in his class in nearly every subject he studied. His success was not merely the result of natural talent, though. He certainly possessed a sharp mind. It came from something deeper, a genuine love of learning and a disciplined commitment to doing everything well for the glory of God. Yet what made Dominic truly remarkable was his humility. Despite his academic success, he never acted proud or superior. He never distanced himself from the other boys or tried to impress them with his knowledge. Instead, he remained simple, friendly, and approachable. When it came time for play and recreation, Dominic was just like the other boys, perhaps even more lively than many of them. His seriousness in study never turned him into a dull or gloomy student. During games, he was full of energy, enthusiasm, and laughter. Even though his health was sometimes delicate and he was not physically very strong, he threw himself wholeheartedly into every activity. Teachers often marveled at how a boy who worked so diligently in class could also be the center of fun and merriment during playtime. His cheerful spirit and generous heart made him one of the most beloved companions among the students. Many boys sought his friendship, drawn by his warmth and kindness. Yet Dominic never tried to win popularity through foolishness or bad behavior. He did not laugh at crude jokes or take part in anything dishonorable. No matter the situation, he remained firm in his principles, refusing anything that was mean, vulgar, or unworthy. In Dominic Savio, his classmates saw something rare: a boy who could be both joyful and deeply good, both playful and deeply holy. And though many around him could not yet fully understand it, the seeds of a great saintly life were already quietly growing within the heart of this humble schoolboy. One of the most striking qualities in Dominic Savio's life was how seriously he guarded his soul's purity, even as an ordinary schoolboy. Like other boys, Dominic enjoyed recreation. One hot summer day, classmates invited him to go swimming. It seemed harmless, so Dominic happily joined them. Swimming in cool water on a blazing summer day was a great joy of youth. At first, everything seemed normal. The boys splashed, laughed, and enjoyed themselves in a carefree way. Words and jokes deeply disturbed Dominic's conscience. Innocent recreation slowly turned into something that dishonored God. This realization shocked Dominic. His pure heart, devoted to God, was deeply wounded by even small offenses against goodness. That evening, the memory weighed heavily. Instead of shrugging it off, Dominic went to prayer, reflecting. Tears filled his eyes. He cried bitterly, not from hurt, but because innocence had turned into sin. Swimming with friends should have been joyful, yet others' careless attitudes had corrupted it. That night, Dominic resolved never to willingly place his soul in danger again. If something threatened his friendship with God, no matter how enjoyable, he would avoid it. A few days later, the same boys approached him again. "Come with us," they said cheerfully. "We're going swimming again." Dominic remembered the previous incident. For a moment, he may have felt the natural desire to join them, but the decision he had made in prayer was stronger than the temptation. With quiet firmness, he refused. From that day forward, Dominic became very careful about choosing his companions. He did not isolate himself, nor did he act proud or judgmental, but he understood that the company we keep can influence our lives. His decision was not born out of prudishness or self-righteousness. Dominic was not trying to appear holier than others. Instead, he was simply faithful to his personal motto, death rather than sin. Those words were not a childish exaggeration. For Dominic, they were a real rule of life. Choosing what was right was not always easy. His refusal sometimes made him the target of ridicule and hostility. Some boys mocked him for being too serious. Others became irritated by his refusal to compromise his principles. Yet Dominic never answered insult with anger. Instead, he remained calm, patient, and kind even toward those who treated him unfairly. Still, his uprightness sometimes stirred resentment in boys whose consciences were troubled by his example. A few of these malicious youths eventually devised a plan. They wanted to damage Dominic's reputation. If they could make him appear dishonest or disloyal, they believed they could destroy the respect others had for him. So they secretly plotted to trap him in a situation that would make it seem as though he had done something wrong. But they underestimated Dominic. His character, shaped by prayer, discipline, and love for God, was far stronger than their schemes. The very qualities they hoped to use against him would soon reveal an even greater example of his courage, honesty, and holiness. One of the most powerful moments in Dominic Savio's life revealed not only his innocence, but his extraordinary strength of character. It began on an ordinary school morning. The classroom buzzed with its usual quiet activity when suddenly a serious offense was discovered. Something so grave that the punishment could only be one thing: immediate expulsion. For a student in those days, expulsion was devastating. It meant disgrace, shame before family, and loss of education. But the real culprit, terrified of the consequences, decided on a cowardly solution. Instead of confessing, he gathered a few companions and plotted a cruel deception. Together they formed a plan to place the blame on someone else. And the boy they chose was Dominic Savio. Perhaps they believed that Dominic's quiet nature would make him an easy target. Perhaps jealousy had already taken root in their hearts. Whatever the reason, they carefully constructed their story and went straight to the headmaster. Their tale sounded convincing. So convincing, in fact, that the headmaster himself became completely persuaded of Dominic's guilt. Without hesitation, he summoned Dominic before the class. Standing before his fellow students, Dominic listened as the headmaster publicly rebuked him with stern anger. The teacher's voice thundered through the room as he condemned the supposed misconduct and warned Dominic of expulsion. The classroom fell silent. Every student stared in astonishment. They had never imagined Dominic Savio could be guilty of such a disgraceful act. Yet there he stood. Dominic did not protest. He did not argue. He did not defend himself. With his head slightly bowed, he remained silent. To the boys who had framed him, this silence seemed like defeat. In their eyes, Dominic's reputation was shattered. He now faced a terrible choice. He could expose the guilty boy, revealing the truth and restoring his own honor, or he could remain silent and allow everyone to believe he was guilty. Dominic chose silence. When the class was dismissed, whispers spread throughout the school. Many students were confused. Some felt disappointed. Others simply could not understand why Dominic had not defended himself. Yet, through it all, Dominic behaved exactly as he always had. There was no bitterness in his heart, no resentment toward those who had wronged him, no desire for revenge. He continued his duties with the same cheerful spirit. Days passed. Then, little by little, the truth began to emerge. The real culprit was eventually discovered, and the deception unraveled. When the headmaster realized what had happened, he was filled with deep regret. He immediately called Dominic to speak with him. Still troubled, the teacher asked, "Why did you say nothing? Why did you not defend yourself when you were accused?" Dominic's answer revealed the depth of his soul. Calmly and simply, he replied, "I said nothing because the other boy had already been in trouble before. If he had been caught this time, he would certainly have been expelled. But since this was my first offense, I hoped I might be forgiven. And besides, I remembered how our Lord himself was falsely accused." Those words struck the teacher deeply. Dominic had willingly accepted humiliation to protect another student from ruin. Soon the truth became known throughout the school. Dominic's honor was fully restored. But now, something greater had been revealed. The boy whom some had mocked now stood in the eyes of his classmates as something extraordinary. Not merely the best student, not merely the most devout, but a young soul of remarkable courage, humility, and charity. Because Dominic Savio had shown them something rare even among adults: the strength to suffer injustice without hatred, and the courage to forgive when others choose cruelty. At just 12 years old, the heart of Dominic Savio was already fixed on a remarkable dream, a dream that would shape the rest of his short but extraordinary life. While other boys his age thought mainly of games and adventures, Dominic quietly carried within him a deep desire. He wanted to become a priest and dedicate his life entirely to God. Recognizing the sincerity of his calling, Dominic's parish priest advised his father to bring the boy to meet John Bosco. John Bosco agreed to meet the boy during one of his visits to the nearby town of Moria, not far from where the Savio family had recently moved to Mandonio. The meeting took place early in October of 1854. It would become one of the most memorable encounters in the history of youthful sainthood. Don Bosco later recalled the moment with vivid clarity. From the instant he saw Dominic, he felt something unusual about the boy. Dominic's face carried a calm serenity, and his manner was both cheerful and deeply respectful. There was nothing forced or artificial about him. His modesty, his bright eyes, and his peaceful demeanor immediately suggested a soul already touched by God's grace. Don Bosco sensed at once that this was no ordinary boy. They began to talk together. Before long, Dominic, with direct simplicity, asked a question that revealed the eagerness of his heart. "Well, father," he said, "what do you think of me? Will you take me back to Turin with you?" Don Bosco smiled at the boy's openness and answered thoughtfully, "Dominic, I think there is some good stuff in you." Dominic looked puzzled for a moment and asked innocently, "Good stuff, father? What is it good for?" Don Bosco replied with a gentle metaphor. "To make a fine vestment for our Lord." Dominic's eyes lit up with enthusiasm. Without hesitation, he answered with youthful excitement, "Splendid idea. Father, I'll be the cloth, and you be the tailor. Take me with you and start the cutting out at once." The answer delighted Don Bosco. Behind the boy's playful words, he could see a spirit full of generosity and readiness to serve God. Yet Don Bosco also knew the demands of study and religious life could be difficult, especially for someone so young. Looking carefully at Dominic, he expressed a concern. "I'm afraid your health may not stand the studies ahead, and we will see how you have done." Dominic ran off happily to join the other boys who had come with Don Bosco for a picnic in Moria. Laughter and games filled the open fields as the boys enjoyed their day together. But Dominic had not forgotten the task. Before throwing himself fully into the games, he took the book, looked carefully at page 9, and read it several times with deep concentration. Then something remarkable happened. Within 8 minutes, Dominic had memorized the entire page. Bursting with excitement, he ran back to Don Bosco and joyfully recited the whole passage perfectly from memory. Don Bosco was astonished. "Bravo, Domine! he exclaimed with admiration. "Since you have learned it so quickly, you can have my answer immediately. Yes, you may come with me to Turin and become one of my boys." Dominic could hardly believe what he had heard. Overwhelmed with gratitude and joy, he promised earnestly, "I will try never to give you cause to complain," where his extraordinary holiness would soon shine even brighter. What seemed like a simple meeting between a priest and a schoolboy was, in reality, the beginning of one of the most inspiring stories of youthful sanctity the world has ever known. A month after his unforgettable meeting with John Bosco, the young Dominic Savio arrived in Turin to begin a new chapter of his life. He now stood inside Don Bosco's famous school, the Oratory of St. Francis of Sales, a place that would soon become the stage for his extraordinary spiritual journey. It was Dominic's very first day. For many boys, arriving at a new school far from home might have been frightening or overwhelming. But Dominic felt something different from the moment he stepped inside the oratory. There was an atmosphere of joy, prayer, and brotherhood that immediately made him feel welcome. Instead of feeling like a stranger, he felt as though he had arrived exactly where God wanted him to be. As Dominic looked around the simple room in Don Bosco's residence, something written on the wall caught his attention. Painted clearly in large letters was a short but powerful phrase that summarized the mission of Don Bosco's life. "Give me souls, take away all else." Dominic stood quietly, studying the inscription. These few words were not merely decoration. They expressed the burning desire that guided Don Bosco's work for young people. After reading the words carefully, Dominic turned to Don Bosco with a thoughtful smile and made a remark that revealed how deeply he had already grasped the meaning behind them. "Father," he said simply, "I see that here your business is souls, not money. I hope that I will have a share in your business." Don Bosco could not help but smile at the boy's insight. Dominic had understood the heart of the oratory's mission immediately. The school was not simply a place for lessons and discipline. It was a place where young people were helped to grow closer to God and to save their souls, and Dominic wanted to be part of that mission. From the very beginning of his life at the oratory, the spiritual fire already burning within him began to shine even more brightly. Though he was still very young, Dominic's interior life, his prayer, his love for God, and his devotion to virtue was unusually deep. Yet his holiness was never hidden or selfish. Instead, it naturally overflowed into concern for others. He wanted his friends to love God too. Soon, Dominic began to exercise an influence among his fellow students, an influence that surprised both teachers and classmates. In modern terms, one might call him a young apostle or a leader in Catholic action. Without pride or arrogance, he quietly encouraged the boys around him to live better lives. The Pope described Dominic as a providential example for the youth of the modern world, especially for those who wish to actively live and spread their faith. Dominic's apostolate reached into every corner of school life. He saw the spiritual struggles that young people often face: temptations, peer pressure, bad influences, and he courageously tried to guide his friends toward what was good. One of his first concerns was the harmful books and materials that sometimes circulated among the students. If he discovered indecent or immoral literature, he did not ignore it. Instead, with courage and kindness, he would warn his companions about the danger it posed to their souls. He also stood firmly against blasphemy and foul language. Whenever boys used God's name carelessly or disrespectfully, Dominic gently but firmly reminded them that such words offended the Lord they claimed to love. Even more impressively, Dominic worked tirelessly to eliminate hatred and quarrels among the students. If two boys were fighting or refusing to speak to each other, Dominic would step in as a peacemaker, encouraging forgiveness and reconciliation. His gentle spirit and sincere goodness made it difficult for anyone to remain angry for long. But Dominic's mission was not only about correcting wrong behavior. His greatest goal was to lead others toward holiness. He encouraged his friends to receive Holy Communion more frequently, believing that closeness to Jesus in the Eucharist would strengthen them against temptation. He also promoted a deep devotion to the Blessed Virgin Mary, especially under the title of Mary Immaculate, whom he loved with childlike confidence. Another cause close to Dominic's heart was the teaching of the Catechism. Whenever possible, he helped other boys learn the truths of their faith, explaining lessons patiently and encouraging them to grow in understanding. What made Dominic's influence so remarkable was that it came not from authority, but from example. He did not command others, he inspired them. His kindness, cheerful spirit, humility, and unwavering devotion to God made him a natural leader among the students. Even those who did not initially share his zeal could not help but admire him. At the oratory of Saint Francis of Sales, Dominic Savio was not simply a student learning lessons in a classroom. He was already becoming something far greater, a young apostle, quietly transforming the lives of those around him, one soul at a time. Dominic Savio's extraordinary courage and moral integrity shone brightly even in the smallest moments of daily life, showing that holiness is about everyday choices. One afternoon in the schoolyard, a group of boys gathered around a pier engrossed in a cheap magazine filled with indecent pictures. Curiosity drew Dominic toward the crowd, and he quickly recognized the sinful content. Without hesitation, he pushed through, snatched the magazine from the boy's hands, and tore it to pieces. The playground fell silent for a heartbeat, stunned by his boldness. Then his clear, unwavering voice rang out, warning his peers, "Cut this out, chaps. There's no room for such stuff here." When one boy tried to brush it off as just a joke, Dominic responded with firm conviction, "You'll hardly see the funny side of it when you're burning in hell." He appealed to their higher instincts, reminding them that God gave them eyes to admire his creation, not to dwell on sin. His courage and wisdom earned the respect of even the rowdiest boys, showing that leadership in virtue requires both firmness and compassion. Dominic's sensitivity to blasphemy was equally striking. He could not bear irreverence toward God. On a walk with a friend, he quietly removed his cap and whispered a prayer when he overheard a shopkeeper take the Lord of Siname in vain. When asked what he was doing, he explained that he preferred to make atonement quietly rather than confront the man rashly. On another occasion, a man blasphemed loudly on the street. Dominic responded with gentle courage, whispering a short prayer of reparation. He approached the man respectfully and asked for directions to the oratory of Saint Francis of Sales. His politeness and tact disarmed the man, and Dominic subtly encouraged him to avoid blasphemy in the future. The man, impressed by the boy's courage and sincerity, promised to reform his ways. Through these small yet powerful actions, Dominic Savio demonstrated that true holiness is grounded in everyday courage, moral clarity, and the willingness to stand for God. His example shows that age is no barrier to making a profound spiritual impact. In a world where fleeting entertainment, casual sin, and thoughtless words abound, Dominic's life reminds us that one steadfast, courageous soul can influence many, turning ordinary moments into lessons of virtue, respect, and reverence. His playground, courage, moral firmness, and gentle tact reveal why he became a model not just for boys and students, but for anyone striving to live a life pleasing to God. A life where daily decisions, however small, are shaped by love, faith, and unwavering principle. Dominic Savio's courage extended beyond personal holiness into peacemaking. Showing true leadership is about guiding others and oneself. At school, he often mediated conflicts among peers, who frequently allowed anger to erupt into physical confrontations. One memorable incident illustrates his extraordinary moral tact and audacity. Two boys became bitterly embroiled in a quarrel. Their animosity, fueled by attacks on family honor, led to lacking swords. They resorted to stones. Plans were made in solemn secrecy, and both sides were ready for violence. Dominic attempted reason and persuasion, but the boys were beyond argument. They had sworn revenge and seemed determined to see their feud through at all costs. Recognizing that direct confrontation alone would not suffice, Dominic devised a plan that required both courage and faith. "Very well," he told them. "If you mean to go on with this fight, will you promise me one thing?" The boys, aware of Dominic's standing and moral authority, reluctantly agreed, curious and suspicious about what he could demand. When the site for the fight was a ton open stretch of wasteland, the combatants selected their stones and faced each other. Dominic, with calm resolve, stepped boldly between them, unarmed, hatless, and completely exposed. In a voice both commanding and gentle, he held aloft a small crucifix and said, "Now, friends, this is the moment of your promise. Look steadily at this. My Lord died on the cross, forgiving his enemies. I now will offend him by my willful act of vengeance." Then, in a gesture that stunned all, he pocketed the crucifix and challenged the boys. Now begin your fight, but throw the first stone at me." The sheer audacity of his act, combined with the moral weight of his faith, shocked the combatants. Their anger faltered. Their rage was confronted not by force, but by courage, innocence, and a higher moral authority. Dominic's fearless interposition made them reconsider the act of vengeance. He transformed bloodshed into a lesson in forgiveness, self-control, and conscience. This episode demonstrates how Dominic's holiness was not limited to personal piety. He possessed an extraordinary ability to influence others, to turn hostility into reflection, and to use courage, intelligence, and faith to resolve conflicts. He showed that true strength lies not in retaliating, but in standing firm for justice and mercy, even when it requires risking oneself. Dominic Savio's life reminds us that moral heroism can begin in the playground, in the smallest moments, and that one courageous, principled action can halt the course of violence and inspire hearts toward goodness. This remarkable episode in Dominic Savio's life is a powerful testament to the moral courage and spiritual wisdom he displayed, even as a young boy. When two schoolmates had escalated a petty quarrel into a deadly stone duel, Dominic did not react with anger or intimidation. Instead, he placed himself squarely between the combatants, unarmed and exposed, relying solely on faith, reason, and the authority of conscience. As the tension mounted and the boys readied themselves to throw their stones, one of them shouted hoarsely, warning Dominic to get out of the way. But Dominic's response was neither fear nor submission. With extraordinary composure, he rebuked them with words that cut deeper than any weapon. "No, you don't want to hurt me, yet you do not scruple to offend God by this sinful outburst of hate and revenge. Can't you see just how senseless the whole thing is? It's not a clean, outright fight. It's sheer, senseless murder." His words, delivered with calm authority, acted like a sudden, piercing jolt to their conscience. In that moment, the rage that had consumed them faltered. The pride, anger, and thirst for revenge that had seemed so overpowering suddenly lost their grip. One of the boys, moved by Dominic's courage and the moral clarity of his appeal, dropped his stones, picked up his scattered school books, and quietly walked away. The scene closes with a vivid image of grace, triumphing over violence. As the boys walked off, the belfries of the city rang the Angelus across the evening stillness, underscoring the spiritual victory that had just occurred. Dominic's intervention not only prevented bloodshed, but also turned a moment of potential sin into a quiet triumph. That evening, a young boy knelt in sorrow outside the confessional of the city church, demonstrating that true courage works through truth and conviction. This incident is more than just a story of a schoolboy averting a fight. It is a lesson for all ages. It reminds us that even the smallest among us, armed with virtue and unwavering courage, can confront hatred, transform hearts, and bring God's justice and mercy. From the earliest years of his life, Dominic Savio showed an extraordinary love for Jesus and the Blessed Sacrament. This devotion, already visible in his childhood, grew even stronger when he entered the school of John Bosco in Turin. At the oratory of St. Francis of Sales, devotion to the Eucharist stood at the very heart of Don Bosco's educational method. His approach to forming young people was not built merely on discipline, lessons, or strict rules. Instead, it was deeply sacramental. Don Bosco believed that the surest way to guide boys toward virtue and holiness was by bringing them close to the sacraments, especially confession and Holy Communion. He therefore encouraged his students to approach the sacraments frequently. The chapel was always open, and the boys were lovingly invited to encounter Christ in prayer. Dominic embraced these opportunities with extraordinary enthusiasm. While many boys attended Mass out of duty, Dominic approached it with deep love and longing. Daily communion became the center of his life. His frequent visits to the Blessed Sacrament were not brief or distracted moments, but heartfelt encounters with the Lord. It was from this Eucharistic devotion that Dominic drew the strength and joy that defined his character. His cheerful spirit, his zeal for helping others, his courage in defending what was retold flowed from the quiet hours he spent before the tabernacle. Years later, Pope Pius XI would reflect on Dominic's life and explain the secret of his holiness. The Pope observed that Dominic's devotion to the Eucharist animated his entire life, transforming the energy and enthusiasm of youth into a powerful force for good. This love for Jesus and the Eucharist sometimes led Dominic into moments so deep in prayer that he completely forgot about the passing of time. One morning, the boys gathered for breakfast at the oratory, but Dominic was nowhere to be seen. At first, this did not cause much concern. Perhaps he was busy or delayed somewhere. But when the time for the midday meal arrived and Dominic still had not appeared, the situation began to worry the others. No one knew where he had gone. Eventually, Don Bosco was informed that the boy had not been seen since early morning. The priest paused for a moment, thinking quietly. Then a gentle smile crossed his face. He suspected he knew exactly where Dominic might be. Walking toward the chapel, Don Bosco entered the silent sanctuary. There, in a quiet corner near the altar, he found the young boy standing completely still. Dominic's eyes were fixed on the tabernacle. He was so absorbed in prayer that he seemed unaware of everything around him. The noise of the school, the passing hours, even hunger itself had disappeared from his awareness. Don Bosco softly called his name, Dominique. There was no response. The boy remained motionless, completely lost in prayer. Don Bosco approached quietly and touched him lightly on the arm. At that moment, Dominic turned and looked at him, surprised. "Oh," he said innocently. "Is the mass over?" Don Bosco gently held out his watch and replied with a smile. "Look here, it is nearly 2 o'clock. Dominic had been standing in prayer for hours. Embarrassed for having unknowingly broken the school rule about meals, he apologized and quietly returned to his daily duties, as though nothing unusual had happened. But moments like this revealed the depth of Dominic's spiritual life. On another occasion, Don Bosco heard something even more mysterious. While passing near the sanctuary, he noticed that someone seemed to be speaking inside. The voice sounded like a conversation, as though the boy were talking with another person. Curious, Don Bosco went to investigate. Entering quietly, he saw Dominic kneeling in prayer, but no one else was there. Yet the boy appeared to be speaking to someone unseen. Listening carefully, Don Bosco heard Dominic's words, spoken with passionate conviction. "I will die rather than commit sin." These were not empty words. They echoed the resolution Dominic had written years earlier on the day of his first Holy Communion, the motto that guided his life. Death rather than sin. In these quiet moments before the Blessed Sacrament, Dominic Savio revealed the secret of his strength. While other boys relied on their own willpower, Dominic drew his courage from a living relationship with Christ. In the silent presence of the Eucharist, the heart of this young boy was being shaped into something extraordinary, and it was there before the tabernacle that the future saint found the grace that would inspire his joyful holiness and courageous love for God. The spiritual life of Dominic Savio was filled with moments that seemed almost mysterious to those around him. Yet Dominic himself spoke about them with the simplicity and humility of a child. One day, John Bosco gently asked him about the unusual moments when he seemed completely absorbed in prayer before the Blessed Sacrament, times when he appeared unaware of the passing hours. Dominic answered, with innocent honesty, "I sometimes get distracted," he said, "and lose the thread of my prayers. Then I see such beautiful things that the hours pass like moments." To Dominic, these experiences were not extraordinary or dramatic. He spoke of them as naturally as another boy might speak about a pleasant walk or a joyful game. But those around him sensed that his soul had been granted glimpses of spiritual realities that most people never perceive. Many remarkable events in Dominic's life were closely connected with his devotion to the Blessed Sacrament. One day, without warning, Dominic burst suddenly into Don Bosco's room, his face full of urgency. "Come quickly, Father," exclaimed. "You are needed at once." Don Bosco looked up in surprise. "Where am I supposed to go?" he asked. But Dominic simply insisted. "Hurry! Father, follow me." Without offering any further explanation, the boy rushed out the door. Curious and somewhat puzzled, Don Bosco followed him through the busy streets of Turin. Dominic moved quickly, leading the priest deeper into one of the poorer districts of the city. At last, they stopped before a modest house. Dominic climbed the stairs rapidly until they reached the 3rd floor. He knocked firmly on the door and then turned to Don Bosco. "It is here that you are needed, Father," he said, and then without another word he quietly slipped away. Moments later, the door opened. A woman stood there, startled to see a priest at her door. But a surprise quickly turned into urgency. "Quick, Father," she cried. "Quick, or you will be too late." She explained that her husband, who had long abandoned the practice of his faith, was now lying inside gravely ill and suddenly asking to be reconciled with God before he died. Don Bosco entered immediately. The man's condition was critical, but there was still time. The priest heard his confession and helped him make peace with God just before death claimed him. It was a moment of profound grace. Later, as Don Bosco returned home, he wondered how Dominic could possibly have known that someone in that house needed a priest so urgently. When he asked the boy about it, Dominic seemed hesitant to explain. He simply avoided the question, and Don Bosco, respecting his modesty, chose not to press him further. Another incident revealed a similar mystery. One day, Dominic approached a house and knocked on the door. When a man answered, the boy politely asked if anyone inside was suffering from cholera disease that had been spreading fear throughout the city. The man looked surprised. "No," he replied firmly. "There is no one sick here." But Dominic remained certain. "I'm sure someone here must be ill," he said quietly. The man shook his head. "You must have mistaken the house," he insisted. "Everyone here is well. Are you sure you came to the right place?" Dominic stepped back into the street and carefully studied the building again. After a moment he returned and knocked once more. "I'm sorry to trouble you again," he said respectfully, "but I'm certain there must be someone sick here." The man began to grow irritated, yet the sincerity in Dominic's voice and the obvious goodness in his manner made it difficult to dismiss him harshly. Finally, with a sigh of impatience, the man said, "Very well, come in if you must, and we will see for ourselves." Together, they began searching the house. They checked room after room, floor after floor, but everywhere they looked, the rooms were empty or filled with healthy people. The man began to think the boy had made a mistake after all. At last, they came to a small, neglected storage room, a place where cleaning tools and old items were kept. And there, hidden among the clutter, they found an old woman. She was lying crumpled on the floor, barely conscious and close to death. She worked as a charwoman and had come earlier that morning to collect her cleaning tools before going out to work. But she had suddenly collapsed, stricken with a terrible disease that was spreading through the city. The man was horrified. Immediately, a priest was summoned. By what seemed almost miraculous timing, the priest arrived just in time to administer the last sacraments, preparing the woman's soul before death. Once again, Dominic's quiet intuition had led to a moment of mercy and salvation. These incidents left many people wondering about the mysterious ways in which God seemed to guide this humble schoolboy. Yet Dominic himself never sought attention or praise for such events. To him, helping a soul reach God was simply the most natural and important thing in the world. In the hidden life of prayer before the Blessed Sacrament, his heart had learned to listen to God, to grace, and to the silent needs of others. And through that listening, this young boy became an unexpected instrument of compassion and salvation in the lives of those around him. As the years passed, the extraordinary holiness of Dominic Savio continued to inspire admiration throughout the Church. Long after his short life had ended, the beauty of his virtue was officially recognized by the Church. On July 9th, 1933, Pope Pius XI solemnly declared Dominic the Venerable Servant of God, an important step toward his canonization. During that occasion, the Pope spoke movingly about the remarkable purity that characterized Dominic's life. In his tribute, the Holy Father described Dominic as possessing the purity of the lily, a symbol often used by the Church to represent innocence and holiness. This purity was not accidental or fragile. It was the fruit of a deep and loving devotion to the Blessed Virgin Mary, whom Dominic regarded as the perfect model of holiness. According to the Pope, this precious virtue had been carefully nurtured throughout Dominic's life. First, it was lovingly guarded by his parents, who raised him in a home filled with faith and devotion. Later, it was protected and strengthened under the guidance of John Bosco and the Salesian educators at the oratory. But perhaps most importantly, Dominic himself took responsibility for defending this virtue. He was not passive or careless about it. Instead, he stood constantly on guard, determined to protect the purity of his soul from anything that might threaten it, even in the smallest way. Pope Pius XI emphasized how essential this virtue was in the spiritual life. Purity, he explained, is the foundation upon which many other gifts of God are built. It prepares the soul for higher callings and opens the heart to the grace of God. For Dominic, purity was deeply connected to his love for Mary. His devotion to the Blessed Virgin was not simply a matter of saying prayers, shaped the entire direction of his life. His love for Mary and for her divine Son filled his soul with a spiritual fragrance. As the Pope beautifully described, the heart of God so readily responds. The Pope concluded that the world, especially the young, desperately needed examples like Dominic, examples that lift high the banner of purity and inspire others to live noble and holy lives. Indeed, Dominic's purity was the clearest proof of his sincere devotion to Mary. His love for her was not merely sentimental. It was a powerful force that strengthened his character and guided his decisions. John Bosco himself later testified about the boy's devotion, saying that Dominic's entire life was a continuous act of love for the Blessed Virgin. This devotion bore remarkable fruit. Dominic lived with an extraordinary purity of heart, one that seemed almost heroic for someone so young. His commitment to chastity and virtue was unshakable, rooted in his deep desire to imitate Mary's holiness. Around this time, an important event occurred in the Church. In 1854, Pope Pius IX officially proclaimed the dogma of the Immaculate Conception, declaring that the Virgin Mary had been preserved from original sin from the very first moment of her existence. This declaration filled Dominic with enthusiasm. He loved Mary deeply, and he wanted to do something special to honor this beautiful title given to her by the Church. One day he expressed his desire openly. "I would like to do something to honor Our Lady, and I must do it soon, or I shall be too late." Dominic understood, perhaps instinctively, that his life might not be long. And so he did not delay. Soon afterward, he gathered some of his companions and founded a small spiritual group within the school, called the Sodality of the Immaculate Conception. Though started by a young boy, the Sodality quickly became a powerful spiritual influence within the oratory. Its purpose was simple but profound: to promote devotion to the Blessed Virgin Mary, to encourage the boys to receive Holy Communion more frequently, to inspire them to live lives of purity, charity, and prayer. Dominic's enthusiasm was contagious. His sincerity drew others toward the same love for Mary that burned within his heart. The Sodality flourished among the students and became a source of renewed spiritual fervor throughout the school. Over time, similar groups would spread to many Salesian schools around the world, continuing Dominic's mission long after his death. Through this simple initiative, Dominic showed that holiness does not depend on age or position. Even a young schoolboy, moved by love for God and the Blessed Virgin, could inspire others and leave a lasting mark on the Church. And as many believed, the Blessed Virgin herself did not fail to reward the devotion of her young servant. In ways both visible and mysterious, Our Lady seemed to grant Dominic special graces, strengthening him in his mission and guiding him ever closer to the holiness that would one day make him one of the most beloved young saints in the history of the Church. The final moments in the life of Saint Dominic Savio reveal a story both deeply moving and profoundly inspiring. It's a story of faith, courage, and peace in the face of death. Only days after returning home, Dominic's health declined rapidly. What first seemed like ordinary weakness soon became far more serious. A doctor was called, delivering troubling news. Dominic's condition was grave. Yet, he showed no fear. With calm, clarity, and deep faith, he asked his father to summon a priest. When the priest arrived, Dominic received the last sacraments with extraordinary devotion. Serenity filled the room. For Dominic, this was not a moment of despair, but one of preparation for something greater. After receiving the sacraments, he spoke words revealing peace. He was at peace, no longer afraid to begin the journey into eternity. These words, from a boy not yet 15, astonished those around him, showing spiritual maturity far beyond his years. The date was March 9th, 1857. As hours passed, Dominic's strength faded, but his mind remained fixed on God. Looking toward a crucifix near him, he quietly recited verses from a favorite hymn, filling the room with prayer. Turning gently to his father, he said the time had come. He asked his father to read prayers for a happy death. Though filled with grief, his father begged. With a trembling voice, he read, while Dominic responded with calm devotion. When the prayers were finished, Dominic spoke again, expressing his deep desire. He wished only to praise God forever. These were not words of fear, but the joyful hope of someone who believed he was about to enter eternal life. After a short rest, Dominic opened his eyes once more. With a gentle smile, he said farewell to his father. Then, after a brief pause, he spoke words that became famous. Looking beyond what others could see, he exclaimed he was witnessing something beautiful. Moments later, hands joined in prayer, a peaceful smile still on his face. The young saint quietly gave his soul back to God. Dominic was buried in the small cemetery of his hometown. His family was poor, affording only a simple grave. Yet, villagers saw the place as sacred, affectionately calling Dominic their piccolo santo, meaning the little saint. Soon, his holiness spread. People heard about the extraordinary life of the young boy who lived with purity and devotion. Many prayed for his intercession, believing he could help them. Stories of favors and miraculous cures were attributed to his prayers. Before long, Dominic's grave in Mondonio became a place of pilgrimage. People traveled from various places, seeking inspiration. Years later, the church began the official process of recognizing his holiness. In 1914, his canonization cause was introduced in Rome. As part of this process, Dominic's remains were removed from the humble village grave. This was done at night. Villagers strongly resisted losing their little saint. His remains were taken to the basilica in Turin. Basilica stands near the playground where Dominic once laughed and played, bringing students closer to God. There he rests, not far from his beloved mentor, Saint John Bosco, who guided him and recognized his grace. The church studied his life. Pope Pius XI declared Dominic a venerable servant of God on July 9, 1933. Later, on March 5, 1950, Pope Pius XII proclaimed him blessed in Rome, a triumph for a boy who sanctified himself, not in a monastery or mission field, but in the ordinary setting of school life. It was a remarkable sight. Never before had Bernini's glory in St. Peter's framed the image of someone so young honored this way. Tens of thousands of faithful from many nations gathered to celebrate the holiness of this humble schoolboy. What makes Dominic's story so powerful is that his life contained nothing outwardly extraordinary. He performed no dramatic feats, founded no institutions. He simply set a clear ideal: to love God completely. He lived that ideal faithfully in the ordinary moments of daily life. Through his example, he showed holiness is not reserved, not for the old, the powerful, or the extraordinary. Even a young student, living a simple life, can become a saint. As we end this beautiful story, one truth shines: holiness can begin in the heart of a child. Dominic did not wait to grow older before loving God completely. In ordinary moments, he built a life that would inspire. Guided by Saint John Bosco, Dominic showed sanctity is possible even in youth. His life reminds us, every small act brings us closer to God. Dominic made a simple resolution: death rather than sin. Not fear, but a declaration of love. Today, his story speaks to young people, families, and anyone searching for deeper purpose. If a boy of 14 could live with such courage, joy, and devotion, then perhaps we too are capable of much more holiness than we often imagine. Thank you for watching and journeying with us through the inspiring life of this remarkable young saint. If this story touched your heart, inspired your faith, or taught you something new, please support the channel. Subscribe so you won't miss more powerful stories of saints, faith, and history that can strengthen your spiritual journey. Your support helps this channel continue sharing these incredible lives with people all around the world. And if you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like the video and share it with someone who might also be inspired. Until the next story, may God bless you, and may the example of the saints continue to guide and inspire us all.